I never imagined that one careless joke at an engagement party would cost me everything I had spent 40 years building. When the attorney looked across the conference table and quietly asked, "Mr. Alfonso, before we continue, is there anything you'd like to tell the family?" Every face in the room turned toward me. I could hear the air conditioner humming. No one spoke. No one moved. Because everyone believed they already knew who the villain was. They were wrong. And if I had told the truth 10 years earlier, none of us would have been sitting in that room. My name is Alfonso Romano. I'm 68 years old, retired after building one of the largest commercial construction companies in Arizona. I wasn't born into money. I poured concrete in the desert when I was 19, slept in pickup trucks between jobs, and spent decades believing that hard work could solve almost anything. Almost. My wife, Eleanor, died after 41 years of marriage. Cancer doesn't negotiate. It doesn't care how much money you have or how many promises you make. After the funeral, my children started visiting more often. At first, I thought they missed me. Then I realized they were counting something else. They wanted to know whether I had updated my will. It started with innocent questions. "Dad, have you thought about simplifying your finances? You shouldn't be handling all those investments alone. What happens if something unexpected occurs?" Every conversation somehow returned to the same subject: money, property, inheritance. I ignored the warning signs because that's what fathers do. We make excuses for the people we love. About 8 months later, my daughter Melissa insisted I attend a charity gala. "You've been alone too long," she said. "You need to meet people again." I almost stayed home. Looking back, I wish I had. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and expensive smiles. Everyone seemed eager to impress someone wealthier than themselves. That's where I first saw her. Margaret Lawson. She stood near the back of the room, wearing a simple navy blue dress that looked completely out of place among the designer gowns. Her silver hair wasn't carefully dyed. She didn't wear diamonds. She didn't seem interested in attracting attention. One of the guests leaned toward me and whispered with a grin, "That's Margaret. Poor thing. Her husband left her a nice little house, but she still shops with coupons." A few people chuckled. I smiled politely. Then someone added, "Can you imagine coming to a charity gala dressed like that?" Without thinking, I answered, "Maybe she's saving the fancy clothes for someone who actually notices." The table laughed. It wasn't my proudest moment. Margaret heard every word. She turned slowly. Our eyes met. She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply looked at me with an expression I couldn't understand. Disappointment. Not anger. As if she expected better from someone my age. Then she quietly walked away. The conversation continued as though nothing had happened. But for some reason, I couldn't stop thinking about her face. A week later, I received an invitation to another fundraising event. When I arrived, Margaret was already there. Before I could apologize, she approached me herself. I believe we got off on the wrong foot. Her voice surprised me. Calm, warm, almost kind. I apologized immediately. She accepted without hesitation. "No one's perfect, Mr. Romano." That should have been the end of it. Instead, we spent nearly an hour talking. She wasn't interested in my business. She didn't ask about my house. She never mentioned my cars or investments. She asked about my wife. She asked what retirement felt like. She asked whether loneliness ever became quieter. No one had asked me questions like that in years. For the first time since Eleanor died, I felt like someone actually saw me instead of my bank account. Over the following months, we met for coffee, then lunch, then long walks through the botanical gardens. My children noticed immediately. Melissa became cold. My oldest son, David, started calling every other day. Even my youngest, who rarely answered my messages before, suddenly wanted family dinners every weekend. I thought they were happy for me. I couldn't have been more mistaken. One evening, I returned home and found an envelope pushed beneath my front door. There was no return address. Inside was a single photograph. It showed Margaret leaving a downtown office building. Standing beside her, was one of the most powerful estate attorneys in Arizona. Across the back of the photograph, someone had written only one sentence: "She's not who she says she is." I stared at those words for a long time. Then my phone rang. It was David. His first question wasn't whether I was doing well. It wasn't whether I had eaten dinner. He asked only one thing: "Dad, have you put her in your will yet?" I didn't sleep that night. The photograph stayed on my kitchen table until sunrise. I must have picked it up 20 times, hoping I'd notice something different. But every time I looked at it, I saw the same image: Margaret walking beside one of the most respected estate attorneys in Arizona, and those 6 words written on the back: "Oh, Roden, she's not who she says she is." David's phone call only made things worse. "Dad, answer me honestly. Have you already changed your will?" The question irritated me. Why does that matter? It matters because people change when money gets involved. So now you're talking about Margaret? I'm talking about anyone who suddenly appears in your life after you've built a fortune. I wanted to argue. Instead, I hung up. For the first time in years, I wasn't angry. I was confused because a small part of me wondered whether he was right. The next afternoon, Margaret invited me to lunch at a quiet cafe overlooking Camelback Mountain. She smiled the moment she saw me, but I couldn't smile back. She noticed immediately. Something happened. I reached into my jacket and placed the photograph on the table. "I think you should explain this." She looked down. For several seconds, she didn't speak. Then she folded the picture, slipped it back across the table, and calmly asked, "Who sent it?" "I don't know." "And you believe it?" "I don't know what to believe." Instead of defending herself, she looked out the window. "I've been expecting this." Those words hit me harder than any denial could have. "You were expecting someone to accuse you." She nodded. "They always do." "Always?" The answer created more questions than it solved. Before I could press further, her phone vibrated. She glanced at the screen. For the first time since I'd met her, genuine fear crossed her face. "I have to go." She stood so quickly that her chair nearly fell backward. "Margaret," she stopped. "If you're hiding something, tell me now." She turned around slowly. "I am hiding something." Then she walked away. No explanation, no apology, nothing. That evening, Melissa arrived at my house without calling first. She never did that. She carried a thick manila folder and placed it on the dining room table. "We hired a private investigator." I stared at her. "We?" "My brothers and I." "You investigated the woman I've had coffee with?" "We investigated the woman who's trying to become part of this family." I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, copies of public records, business registrations, property transactions. Most of them meant nothing to me. Then I saw one document that made my stomach tighten. Margaret Lawson had served on the board of a private family trust worth hundreds of millions of dollars. That didn't match the woman who clipped grocery coupons. Melissa watched my face carefully. "You see? No. No? Being on a board doesn't make someone a criminal." She leaned closer. "Dad, why would a woman connected to that kind of money pretend to live like an ordinary widow?" I had no answer. That question followed me all night. The following morning, I drove to the address where the photograph had been taken. A modern office tower in downtown Phoenix. The directory listed only one tenant on the top floor: Hamilton and Pierce, estate and family wealth attorneys. I almost turned around. Instead, I took the elevator. The receptionist smiled politely. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. I'm afraid our attorneys." Before she could finish, another voice interrupted. "Mr. Romano?" An older man in a gray suit stepped out of the hallway. "I've been wondering when you'd come." My heart skipped. "You know who I am?" "Of course." He extended his hand. "My name is Charles Pierce, the very attorney standing beside Margaret in the photograph." He invited me into his office. Dark wood, leather chairs, walls covered with family portraits instead of awards. That felt unusual. Successful lawyers usually displayed victories. He displayed people. "I suppose you're here because of Margaret." I nodded. He sighed. I wish I could answer your questions, but my client instructed me not to discuss her affairs. So there is something to discuss. There always is. He slid a business card across the desk. If she decides to tell you the truth, she'll bring you back here herself. That was it. The meeting lasted less than 5 minutes. Yet somehow I left with even more doubts. 3 days passed without hearing from Margaret. No calls, no messages, nothing. I finally convinced myself it was over. Then, on Sunday evening, my doorbell rang. Margaret stood outside. Her eyes were red. She looked exhausted. I owe you an explanation. I stepped aside. She entered quietly and remained standing in the hallway. What I'm about to tell you will probably end whatever this relationship has become. I waited. She took a deep breath. My late husband didn't leave me a small house. I already knew that. He left me responsibility. She paused. My family controls one of the largest privately held trusts in the Southwest. The words landed exactly as I expected, so the rumors had been true. She was wealthy, very wealthy, but that still didn't explain why she'd hidden it. I never wanted people to know. Why? Because every man I met wanted to marry my last name instead of me. There was pain in her voice, real pain, not rehearsed. She told me about decades of pretending to be ordinary, driving old cars, shopping without bodyguards, avoiding expensive jewelry, testing whether people liked her before they discovered her wealth. I thought you failed that test, she whispered. So why give me another chance? She smiled sadly. Because you apologized. Before I could answer, headlights swept across my living room window. A black SUV stopped outside. Another one parked behind it. Margaret's face instantly lost all color. No, what is it? She looked toward the front door. They found me. Who? She didn't answer. There was a hard knock. Then another. Then a man's voice echoed through the house. Mrs. Lawson, open the door. The trustees have voted. You're coming with us. The knocking didn't stop. It grew louder. Then came a third strike, heavy enough to shake the front door. Margaret closed her eyes. I was hoping they'd give me another week. Who are they? I asked. They're not here because of the money. That answer made no sense. Everything over the past month had been about money. The inheritance, the trust, my children, the lawyer, the photograph. Now she was telling me none of it mattered. The man outside spoke again. Mrs. Lawson, if you don't open the door, we'll come back with a court order. Margaret looked at me. If you open that door, your family will never forgive you. I walked to the entrance anyway. When I opened it, 3 people stood outside. The man in front introduced himself politely. My name is Richard Hale. I'm chairman of the Lawson Family Trust. He wasn't angry. He wasn't threatening. He almost looked exhausted. We're here because Mrs. Lawson disappeared without informing the board. Margaret stepped beside me. I didn't disappear. You abandoned your responsibilities. I asked for time. You've had 18 months. Silence settled over the porch. I finally asked the question no one else seemed willing to answer. What responsibilities? Richard looked at Margaret before answering. She never told you? Margaret lowered her eyes. No. Richard sighed. Mr. Romano. Margaret isn't simply a beneficiary. He paused. She controls the trust. That wasn't surprising anymore. Then he added the sentence that changed everything. She also controls the charitable foundation that finances nearly every children's cancer hospital in this state. I stared at Margaret. She had never mentioned any of it. Not the hospitals, not the foundation, not the thousands of families depending on those decisions. She whispered, I wanted someone to know me before they knew what I owned. For the first time, I believed her completely. 2 days later, I accompanied Margaret to the trust headquarters. The boardroom looked exactly like every corporate boardroom I'd seen during my career. Expensive furniture, cold faces, perfect suits. Yet something felt wrong. No one looked relieved that their chairwoman had returned. They looked disappointed. Richard opened the meeting. "There is another matter requiring immediate attention." He pressed a button. A projector illuminated the wall. Bank transfers appeared one after another. Large transfers, millions of dollars, each approved electronically, each carrying Margaret's authorization. I looked at her. She seemed genuinely confused. "I never approved those," Richard answered quietly. "According to the records, you did." Someone had forged her authorization. The room exploded into accusations. One board member insisted Margaret had been secretly stealing from the foundation. Another claimed she'd been preparing to flee the country. For a moment, even I felt doubt creeping back. Then I noticed something strange. Every accusation came from the same end of the table. 3 trustees, always interrupting, always speaking before anyone else, trying too hard. That evening, I couldn't stop thinking about the transfers. 40 years in business had taught me one simple lesson. When everyone points toward the same suspect, look behind the people doing the pointing. The next morning, I visited Charles Pierce, the attorney who had refused to answer my questions weeks earlier. This time, he closed the office door before speaking. "I've been waiting for you. I think someone framed Margaret." He nodded. "I know." I froze. "You knew?" "I've known for months." "Why didn't you stop it?" "Because I had no proof." He opened a locked drawer and removed a flash drive. "The trust's internal auditor delivered this to me before he died in a car accident." The words sent a chill through me. Died? He called it an accident. Charles didn't. Inside the drive were internal emails, deleted approvals, financial reports. Everything pointed to a coordinated fraud. But the mastermind wasn't Margaret. It wasn't Richard. And it certainly wasn't me. One name appeared over and over again. David Romano, my son. I read the screen 3 times before my mind accepted the letters. Impossible. Then another document appeared. A consulting contract. David had secretly advised 3 trustees for almost 2 years. He had been receiving enormous monthly payments. Suddenly, everything made sense. The questions about my will, the private investigator, the anonymous photograph. He hadn't been trying to protect me. He had been isolating me. If Margaret married me, she would eventually discover the fraud inside the trust. David couldn't allow that to happen. The confrontation took place 3 days later. Every member of the trust attended. So did federal investigators. David walked into the room smiling. That smile disappeared the second Charles Pierce connected the flash drive to the projector. Email after email appeared on the screen. Wire transfers, secret contracts, encrypted messages. No one spoke. Finally, David looked at me. "Dad, I can explain." "No." My voice surprised even me. "You've been explaining for 2 years." Federal agents stepped forward. Melissa burst into tears. My youngest son couldn't even look at his brother. As they placed David in handcuffs, he shouted one final sentence. "I did it for this family." I answered without raising my voice. "No, you did it for yourself." 6 months later, the investigation ended. Millions of dollars were recovered. The foundation survived. Every children's hospital kept its funding. Margaret remained chairwoman. She asked me to join the foundation's advisory board. Not because I was wealthy, not because I understood finance, but because, as she told me, "You finally learned the difference between protecting money and protecting people." A year later, we married quietly. No television cameras, no luxury ballroom, only close friends, and one empty chair left beside the front row. It belonged to Eleanor, because loving again never meant forgetting the woman who helped make me the man I became. People still ask whether I regret trusting Margaret. I tell them they're asking the wrong question. The real mistake wasn't trusting the wrong person. It was doubting the right one, while refusing to see the betrayal inside my own family. Sometimes the most dangerous stranger isn't the person who walks into your life. It's the one who's been sitting at your dinner table for years. If this story made you think, tell me in the comments. If you found evidence against someone you loved, Would you believe the evidence? Or would you trust your heart first? Would you trust your heart first? Would you trust your heart first?